Hello, it's Holly. I think I'm actually 1 minute late, so let's see if anyone is here yet. I'm going to have to let the dog go into the kitchen. Hello, hi. People are on here, brilliant. So, hello, hi there. Oh, so this is my first ever Instagram live, as you can probably tell. So this feels quite strange, actually, talking to people. It's lovely to see all your names popping up. Thank you for the waves. And thank you so much for coming on a Sunday night as well, especially because Countryfile is on, as if we're missing that. So while you guys, wow, there's loads of you. This is lovely. So while you guys are all joining in, I just thought I would start by explaining what we're going to talk about in this Q&A. So this Q&A is going to be all about how to become a Pilates teacher. So it'd be really great if any of you are thinking about being a Pilates teacher, if you could put it in your messages to let me know. And also then, once you are a Pilates teacher, how to maximise your clients and how to make sure that you're the best teacher that you can be. So if you guys have any questions as we go along, feel free to pop them up. I know some of you have already sent some questions through, which I've got in front of me, and I'll try and go through those as well. But yeah, as and when they come through, I will address them. So I'm going to just start by letting you know a little bit about my Pilates journey. So I actually started as a receptionist in a Pilates studio. And so I was a receptionist and really enjoyed it, and then I decided that I wanted to go and be a manager. I was asked by the owner to become the manager because she was away so often, and then, oh, there's a question coming through. It's great to know what your background is. So I became a manager of a studio, so I got to really see it from a customer point of view. And then I was doing Pilates every day. I absolutely loved it. And it was the instructors that actually said, have you thought about going away and doing a qualification and becoming a Pilates teacher? And so I did, and actually as soon as I decided that's what I wanted to do, there was no other option for me. So it wasn't a hard decision. It was a hard decision because I would be giving up my job. So the training is quite intense, and there's ways around it, but it's quite difficult to have a job and do your training at the same time. So I gave up my job as the manager and went and did my qualifications, and then I became an instructor. After that, I then worked my way up, became head trainer at a couple of studios, so was in charge of the hiring and firing and training, and then it's all gone from there. So from a Pilates training point of view, I've done all of my training with STOT. So I did my mat qualification first, so mat Pilates, and then I did my advanced mat work, and then I did my reformer later on, and I also have a PT qualification as well. So I started off with my mat work because I really wanted to make sure that I had a really good grounding, and I felt like equipment-based Pilates is adding another extra layer on. So not only do I need to know the Pilates, but I need to understand the equipment. So I started off with mat work, and that course was 2 weeks intensive. So you were there all day, every day. And then you have, I believe, a year to do all of your practicing on clients and observing other instructors teaching, and then you have to do your exam within a certain amount of time. So I think that's a year. And then reformer was the same, so I then did another 2 weeks intensive, and you have a year to then do all of your coursework and your case studies. So most of my experience is with STOT. Now there are numerous training providers, and it can be really confusing when you're looking at who to go with, because I've actually just done the same thing in preparation. I had a list of the training providers that I know best. And I thought I'll just go on and double check, their method and what their background is. And even I was shocked at how many training providers there are since I did my STOT training. So I can see how it's really confusing when you're having a look. And I guess my best advice would be choosing to go with a training provider that you have trained with one of their instructors. So the reason I chose STOT was because a lot of the instructors that I was doing Pilates with were STOT trained, and I really liked the way that they taught, and so I knew that's how I wanted to train. So I would say find an instructor that you really, really like, and then ask them, where did you do your training and how did you find it, and do you have any feedback, basically. A lot of the training providers, so I would say the main ones are STOT, and they are all over the UK. So I trained in London with STOT, but I actually feel like they've got one in Brighton. They might have one up north. I think there's a few training schools for STOT around the UK, but they're also international. So I liked the fact that I could go to any other country and that STOT qualification would apply in other countries and people would have heard of it. I think it started in Canada. Sorry if it was America. So STOT, there's BASI, as well, BASI. They're also international. They're one of the really big ones. Body Control. I think it's definitely UK based. Whether it's international, I'm not 100% sure. So if anyone listening is from Body Control, feel free to tell me I'm wrong. But I know that the owner is English, I believe. So Body Control are another really good in-depth training provider. They've got a really good reputation, and I think that their style of Pilates training is quite rehabby, so it's very thorough and there's a lot of emphasis on technique and anatomy, so incredibly in depth. So Body Control instructors are known for working quite often in like physiotherapist centres and working in rehab. There's also, I only found out recently, Balanced Body, who I have buy my reformer machines from. They have their own training course as well. Who else is there? APPI is a really good one. It's really popular with physios. They do courses that are just for physios, but you can also do their Pilates qualifications if you have no physio qualification, but they are very physio based. So great if you wanted to work in that part of Pilates. So they're the main ones in my mind: STOT, BASI, Body Control, APPI, and Balanced Body. So, Holly, do you think it's beneficial to train as an instructor to gain more in-depth knowledge rather than just attending classes? Okay. So I started off with obviously doing classes before I did my course, and there was actually a guy on the course who'd never done Pilates before, and I was thinking, gosh, you are in for a shock. And so I think you can learn a lot from classes, but workshops and courses are just really so important if you are going to add any Pilates exercises into what you currently teach, or if you're a physio, mainly because there are so many different Pilates training providers. If you do Pilates, you've probably noticed that every studio you go to, the type of Pilates that's taught is very different. So one studio might be very classical, so heavily based on the original Pilates that Joseph Pilates created, whereas other studios would be very dynamic and quite far removed from the original classical Pilates. Not necessarily a bad thing, but over the years we've as we've learned more about the body, we've slightly changed things. So some Pilates exercises have been tweaked and changed, and so aren't always taught the original way. So it's quite good to make sure that you do go on official courses and workshops to see how they're supposed to be taught. Do I still go to workshops to learn more? I do, yeah, when I have the time. And I find that if I've been teaching too much and I'm sitting and I'm teaching a client and I'm thinking, oh, which exercises haven't I done in a while? I feel like I need some inspiration. That's when I know I need to go on a workshop. Sometimes I think if you're teaching too much, you start to almost not lose the love for it, but you get comfortable. And so I really like going on workshops. STOT, actually, once you've trained with STOT, you have to do a certain number of workshops to keep your accreditation, which I think is a really, really good idea. So with STOT, I've done Pilates for runners, pre and postnatal. I've also done workshops for training people who are very elderly or people who have arthritis. Those topics won't really get covered in your main qualification. You'll be taught how to teach the general public, but that's not representative of who you're going to have in your classes. So I guess that neatly moves on to the other question. So it's Claire Gallagher, you asked whether someone should do mat or reformer Pilates. So if anyone doesn't know what reformer Pilates is, it's Pilates on a reformer machine. So it looks a bit like a rowing machine. If you imagine a rowing machine, double the width, and it's got straps that you might put your hands and your feet in, and it has a foot bar, and it's a moving machine basically. Now I started Pilates on reformers, so actually I found it really difficult to go back to doing mat because I found it a little bit dull, if I'm honest, because there wasn't a machine to play with and change springs. So for me, I really enjoyed the reformer. I find that lots of clients enjoy that. You can add extra springs to make it harder. You can take springs off to make it easier. You can challenge anyone, no matter how strong or how weak they are. But on the flip side, if you have someone who's injured, a reformer machine can feel safer for them because they're kind of held in position. There's shoulder pads and there's somewhere to put your feet. And so it's difficult to get it wrong, basically. So a reformer has lots more possibilities, I believe, and is a bit more fun. Mat work, the benefits of learning to teach mat work is you can teach mat work anywhere. So you could teach it in someone's home, which is a really good way for you to get clients at the beginning when maybe studios won't take you on because you haven't got experience. You can do mat work in the park, you can do group classes, and you need very little equipment. So I did mat work first, like I said at the beginning of the video, because I really wanted to learn the basics first, and then I wanted to know how to apply that onto the reformer. So mat work is a really good one to have, especially first. Hi James. Especially first because it means that you can do it anywhere, you don't need any equipment, and if no studio takes you on, you could still go and teach people elsewhere. But if you have the funds, the reformer course is incredible, and I don't teach much mat work at all anymore. It'd be really interesting, you guys who are listening, if you could let me know whether you do teach mat or reformer, and also if you have any different feedback. There's some people that swear by teaching mat work and they just don't like teaching on the reformer, and if you're really inventive, mat Pilates can be just as fun. So mat or reformer, it's really up to you. If you enjoy going to reformer classes, then I would suggest you could probably do with doing a reformer course. You don't have to do your mat work first. You don't with stop. Whether that's different in other training providers, I don't know. But I would go with whichever you personally prefer doing. And so then if you are thinking about being an instructor, my advice would definitely be going to as many different classes as possible. So are there training courses for people who don't necessarily want to teach? That's a really difficult one. I would imagine there's probably workshops that you could go on where they might teach you more about anatomy and the history of Pilates. But I would imagine that most people that are going to pay to do a course are doing it because they want to teach, so it would be heavily focused on how to teach Pilates. How long do you have to have been practicing Pilates before you can start teaching? So let's say today you decided that you wanted to be a reformer instructor. I would say that you would need to make sure that you were quite advanced personally. As I said, on my course there was a guy there who'd never done Pilates before, and it really held the class back. I doubt he's listening, but if you are, I'm sorry. He held the class back quite a lot because you need to know how to do the exercises yourself to be able to teach someone else. And if half of your training time is spent with you trying to get your head around the choreography and the breath, it's going to be really difficult for you then to work out how to teach someone else. So I would say try and do at least 6 months of really going to as many different classes as you can. Try lots of different instructors as well. Even if you find someone that you really like, it's quite good sometimes to go to instructors that then you realise you don't like, so that you can see what type of instructor you don't want to be. Yeah, so someone else who learnt mat learnt reformer, and now does not much mat work anymore. That's the same as me. So yeah, try lots of different instructors. So even now, I'll go to a class and there'll be an instructor and I'll think, wow, this person's amazing, I've learnt loads from them. And then other classes I might go to and I might think, gosh, she didn't mention the breath once, or they really didn't talk about neutral and imprint. And so it helps me remind me, I must remember when I'm teaching that I need to also remember to talk about the breath and remember to talk about neutral and imprint. So try lots of different instructors, decide what type of instructor you want to be. You might want to be very classical, in which case that will dictate which training provider you go with, or you might want to be really dynamic, which in a way I am, and that will also mean that you might want to go to one of the less classical training providers. So 6 months, I would say, get really, really good at it, and then go on the course. And again, once you've worked out what type of instructor you like, ask them where they trained, and then I would honestly go to the same place as them. At the end of the day, just like with your driving test, you all learn the same exercises basically. There might be slightly different names with different training providers, but you'll learn the same thing, and at the end of your course, you'll be qualified to teach. And the real learning is once you've qualified, like with your driving test. So you just need to practice on as many bodies as possible. So I've been doing this for about 8 years now, and I would say I've probably taught maybe over 1,000 bodies. And so I kind of feel like I've probably seen it, most things. Maybe I haven't seen it all, because still there'll come clients that completely confuse me or show me things that I've not seen before. But the more bodies that you practice on, the more you start to learn how to cue and how to phrase things in a way that the general population will be able to understand, because how you learn to teach on your course might not work on people who've maybe never exercised before. So that was actually a question that we had beforehand. How do I practice saying everything when I'm teaching exercises? So anyone who has done a Pilates qualification, you realise there's a lot to tell people whilst they're doing the exercise, and you don't want them to be doing the exercise for half an hour while you try to describe it. You've got the breath to tell them, you've got the actual what are they going to do that you need to tell them. You might need to tell them what springs they need on the machine. You might need to also tell them where they should feel the exercise and where they shouldn't feel the exercise. And that's a lot to say, and it's a lot harder than just saying to someone, do a squat. So in our studio, we train our instructors to layer how they describe each exercise. So we would start by giving the client just a very basic overview of what they're about to do. So if it was an abdominal curl, we would say to them, when you inhale, you're going to prepare. When you exhale, you're going to lift your head and shoulders up away from the mat. When you inhale, you'll stay. And when you exhale, you'll come back down. That's already quite a lot. So we'll say that, and then we'll let them get going. Then we'll remind them of the breath again whilst they're moving. So again, you're going to inhale to wait. Good. Exhale now to lift. Inhale as you stay. Exhale as you come back down. Then we'll start adding a little bit more in. When you lift your head, just make sure you've got a tennis ball underneath your chin and you're holding on to it. So we start to give them a bit of visual cueing. And then we might start to add in, you should feel it in your tummy, you shouldn't feel it in your neck. So you're constantly layering, but get the client moving first of all, so that they're not lying there thinking, this is boring, I haven't moved, and I've been here half an hour. So question, in a comprehensive course, do you think you can learn all equipment and moves to the same level as individual courses? So that's a really good question. So some training providers don't break down each piece of equipment into different courses. So with STOT, like I said, you can do mat work. And that's one big course. You do that, you're qualified to teach mat. Then you can go back and you can do reformer, which is what I did. And then you can also go back and do the Cadillac and the chair, which are other pieces of Pilates equipment. Whereas I think Bassi, it's a full course, so you learn absolutely everything. I guess the benefits to learning it all is that it's one price. If you're going to take time off work to get it done, you've done it all, and you've got one exam at the end of that, one huge piece of coursework, and then it's all over. Whereas I found that with STOT, I wanted to just do one thing first and nail it and do the exam and then go off and practice that, and then do reformer and really focus just on the reformer. So I don't think that there would be any difference between the two as to how good you are when you're finally qualified, because I believe with BASI it's just a much longer course, so it probably works out about the same. The problem is you would have to take off quite a lot of time to do that course. So for me, 2 weeks of having no income was already hard enough, but at least I did it in those 2 weeks. There are courses that are on weekends, so don't feel like you have to give up your job. One question that did come through beforehand was whether I think you have to give up work to go and do your training. Now, I gave up my job because I was the manager there, and I literally went away and did my 2 weeks, did my 2 week course, and then as soon as possible got back into the studio and was teaching again. And like I said, I had to really save to make sure I had those 2 weeks worth of income. But I've also known lots of people who've done it on the weekend courses. So let's say it's when you do it all in one go, that is 10 days worth of in studio training. So you've got 5 days and 5 days on the second week. So those 10 days would be split over 5 weekends instead. For me, it would have just meant working 7 days a week if I did that. So I wanted to just squeeze it in, get it done. But you could work full time and do your training, as long as you make sure that you then straight away start practicing on actual bodies in front of you. Again, guys, if you've got any questions, do let me know, because this is my first Q&A, and so I might just be absolutely waffling on, who knows. So the questions that came before: should you do reform or a mat? We've talked about that. Can you recommend places to do teacher training in the UK? So again, the ones that are definitely in the UK are STOT, BASI, Body Control, APPI. They're Australian, but I'm sure that they are in England as well. And Balanced Body. I've seen some courses that are 2 years. Can you do a 2 week course without any PT qualifications? That's a good question. So I think when they say it's 2 years, that sounds like a really long, that's a really long course. But if you think about the STOT one, it's actually a year's qualification, because you do your 2 weeks intensive in the studio, but then you have to go away and you have to do a case study. So you have to do a client and write up everything that you did with them over 12 weeks and how you changed things and how it all went. What did you find out? You've then also got anatomy exams. You have like an actual theory where you have to teach a body in front of an instructor who you've never met before, and you have to get the order correct, and it has to be perfect. So I don't know, a 2 year course sounds really long, but I guess it depends how long it's spread out over. And then another part of that question is whether you would need any other qualification to do a Pilates qualification. So when I applied... Oh, that's really helpful. So can someone just let me know, can you see what everyone else is writing? Because someone's just replied to that previous question, saying about how it's 50 hours of studio training, which is about the same actually as the STOT one, which makes it feel longer. Ah, good, thank you. You've answered the question. So yeah, so it can all end up being quite a long course. So with the STOT one, I didn't have a PT qualification when I did my Pilates qualification, and I remember when I looked at the course information, it said that I had to have you had to have like a level 2 gym instructor qualification, and I didn't have that. And I remember calling them and saying, like, I don't have that, but I've been doing Pilates for 6 months, I'm a manager of a studio, could I still join the course? And they said, as long as you're advanced at Pilates, you can do it. So I think there'll be different that different training providers will have different rules. You might have to already have a qualification in sport, but actually a lot of them, they'll expect that you don't. And at our studio, we actually only hire people who are both PT and Pilates trained, and that is really difficult to find. So I'd imagine that most people doing Pilates qualifications maybe don't already have a qualification. So I didn't have that, and then I did my PT qualification later on. And I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but actually, if I compare the Pilates qualifications that I've done compared to the PT qualification I've done, Pilates qualifications are so much more in depth. The anatomy was really in depth compared to PT, so I actually found the PT qualification quite easy, if it's okay to say that, and I had been teaching for a while, so actually if you've got a PT qualification, don't be you'll know a little bit about it, but don't think that it will be a breeze, your Pilates qualification, or that you don't need it, because you will learn just so much more about the body. And vice versa. If you have done a Pilates qualification, you will find a lot of what you cover in your PT qualification you will have already gone through. So then another question that came through was about making sure that do I still feel inspired to do Pilates myself. If I'm completely honest, I did more Pilates myself before I became an instructor, and then maybe those first couple of years oh, perfect. Good luck. So for those first couple of years, I did a lot of Pilates because actually I wanted to make sure I had enough exercises to get me through the fact I was teaching about 6 classes a day. So I went all over London, and I would really recommend this. I tried out pretty much every studio, so hardcore, boot camp, even then some of the smaller ones, practiced with lots of other one-to-one instructors, and just built up a bank of exercises that I really liked, and that got me through. And then I started teaching more, and it's like with anything, the more Pilates you're teaching, the less time you have for your own practice. But I know when I need to go and do a class, or when I'm running out of inspiration, or I feel like my body's pretty broken, it's so important that you keep going, otherwise you can get quite stale. And also it's nice to hear other people's way of describing an exercise that you might have been teaching for years one way that people just aren't quite getting, and then you might hear that one cue from someone else and you'll think that is just the best cue I've ever heard, and then you can replicate it in your own practice. So really important that you do keep practicing on your own, and the workshops as well are another way of keeping inspired. The practicalities of being a teacher. I'm going to touch on this question now. Do you use any online sources for inspo? So there's Pilates Anytime, and I bet loads of you either use it or have heard of it. So Pilates Anytime is an online platform where you pay a certain amount per month, and there are, I don't know, maybe hundreds of Pilates videos on there, all filmed by Pilates Anytime. They've got some of the best instructors in the world, I would say, and there's reformer videos, mat work, and for me, I've found that really useful. There is there's an instructor on there, and I wish I could remember her name. She's got brown hair, and she's quite young. She's very pretty. She is really dynamic, so I found a lot of her videos have given me some quite fun exercises to try on clients. And whenever I try them on clients, they always say, "Oh, this is a new one. This is fun," and it's always one of hers. So Pilates Anytime. And then, to be honest, that's the only online one I would use. And then I'd rather be in person if I can. So go to classes as much as you can, even if they're really rubbish. It's a good experience. The actual teaching, so the practicalities of being an instructor, if you're thinking about becoming one, is it's actually, whenever I tell people that I'm a Pilates teacher, they always say, "Oh, I bet that's lovely, I bet you just work out all day." And actually it's really quite tiring. You're stood on your feet, but you're not stood still, you're moving around constantly, you're demonstrating, you're often demonstrating the same leg every single time. So you end up building up maybe one set of muscles or one side of the body quite a lot. So whenever I teach, I will always teach on the left leg first. So I always know when it comes to doing the other leg, it will definitely be the right leg, because I always do the left leg first. But then that means I only ever demonstrate my left leg, because when they do their second leg, they've already been demonstrated it. So I've ended up making my left side of my body much stronger than my right by accident. So there's strange things that you'll end up doing to your body from being a Pilates teacher that actually go against the Pilates principles. Another side effect for me is that I'm demonstrating all day to clients to stand up straight, lift up, stop hunching over, and I've ended up straightening out my spine from demonstrating so much. So someone's saying, I'm a Pilates instructor and I'm finding I have niggling injuries, but it's really hard to rest when teaching every day. Do you ever have this problem? This is exactly what happens. So you're thinking about everyone else's bodies all day and you're fixing everyone else, and often you forget to fix your own body. So I've got really bad lordosis, which is why I like Pilates so much. And I know when I'm working too much because it gets very, very sore. And like I said, you're standing up all day, but you're also leaning over and you're correcting people, and you know, you might be moving them and moving the foot bar and changing the springs, and none of that is particularly cautious or careful. So that's another reason why it's really important to make sure that you do your Pilates training as well, and that you don't forget about your body. So yeah, it might just be worth mixing it up a little bit. So trying not to demonstrate the same exercises all the time, like I've been doing with my left leg, or telling people to always stand up straight, and making sure that you're not giving yourself kind of repetitive strain or just getting really, really strong on one side of the body. So yeah, so you have to look after yourself, and yeah, so you will be stood on your feet all day. And the other thing is you'll be talking constantly. So in Pilates, like we said earlier, there's so much to talk about that you end up just literally talking non-stop for the whole hour. And in my studio, I might be teaching 8 or 9 clients a day. So that's 8 or 9 hours of talking constantly. And if you're having a change of career and you're used to working in an office where you might make a few phone calls or talk to people on your lunch break, it can actually be a bit of a shock. And so I remember when I first started teaching, and I've heard this from a lot of other instructors as well, that they would wake themselves up thinking about the breath, or counting 1, 2, 3, and they would literally really struggle to switch off from talking. So it's just something to note that at the beginning that can be really quite draining, but eventually you do get used to it. So sometimes when I get home from work, I just need a few minutes, whether it's the train journey home or the car ride, to just not talk to anybody, because yeah, it's quite hard on your voice. I don't know what the long-term effects are, but then maybe you just end up liking the sound of your own voice. So yeah, so with regards to teaching, be careful of your body. You'll be talking all day, so it's not just you exercising all day. Actually, your exercise comes last. You'll also find that whenever you tell someone what you do, they'll start telling you all about their bodies. So say, oh, I've got this dodgy elbow, and that will come out a lot at dinner parties, things like that. So you're expected to know the answer to everything. But yeah, eventually you can't help but help other people. And another thing I've noticed is if I go to classes, there is a studio in London that is a very crazy HIIT workout, and it's amazing, but you'll find that every time you're looking at people in the class, you can't help but want to say to them, put your shoulders down, or lift up your chin a little bit, or just be careful of those dumbbells. So you really find it quite tricky to not look around at other people's bodies. So some of the other questions: do you think it's possible to work full time? We've already talked about that. So you've got the weekend training options, or you've got the option of sort of doing it all intensively and getting it out the way. Where did you train? So I trained with Stott. So this person's mentioned, it's Natasha, you've mentioned about you're thinking of starting with Bassi or Polestar. So Polestar is one that I just don't know that much about. I don't know any instructors that have trained with them off the top of my head, but I do know that it's another one of the big ones. Again, try to find an instructor who trained with them and then see whether you enjoy their class. Chances are, if you enjoy their class, you will enjoy teaching that way. So I quite like going to classes that are quite fast paced and they keep going, and there's lots of talking about anatomy, and they're not particularly relaxing, and that is how I like to teach as well. Once qualified, what are your tips for building your Pilates business? So I guess that's a really, really good question, actually. So when you first qualify, you're going to be really lucky if you get a job straight away. The only reason I was able to teach straight away was because I'd come from working in a Pilates studio. Otherwise, it can be really difficult to get experience because most studios want someone who already has experience. And then you're in this catch-22 because how am I supposed to get experience if no one will hire me? So what I also did on the side, and I would always recommend to a new instructor, is get some flyers made and flyer your local area and offer your services to people either in their home or your home, especially if you're mat work, because then you can do that anywhere. So flyer your local area and you'll be really surprised. I actually made a client who lived in the street opposite mine, Sally, and she became just such a lovely client, and I trained her for years, and it was very easy to fit in because I could do it when I was at home or on the weekends. So all that studios care about is that you have practiced on people. It doesn't necessarily have to be that you've worked in other studios. It's just very obvious when an instructor has not taught anyone before. Like I said, you need to have been able to see lots of different bodies, see how they move, see the funny quirks, see the exercises that just don't work how you may have been taught them, and see what the most sort of common posture types are as well. So that's all we really care about. We just want to know that you know how to vocalize what you want your clients to do, and that you have an understanding of, if your client can't do what you want them to do, what do we need to do differently to get that result? So train people in their homes. Obviously just be a little bit careful from a safety point of view. Make sure you let someone know where you're going, and maybe speak to people on the phone before you go to their house. I know you can't tell if someone's odd on the phone, but just make sure that you're thinking about your own safety as well, going to someone's house that you don't know. And then practice on your friends, and practice on your family, and just get as much practice as you can. Go to as many classes as possible. You could start asking people if you could observe their classes. Unfortunately, we always have to say no, because our studio is so private, but there are lots of studios that will let you observe. And then you could even offer your services for free for cover at first. So you might be able to get onto a cover list as a paid instructor, but if you're really struggling and no one will take you on, you could say to studios, look, if you're really struggling for cover, I just need the practice and the experience, so like I will offer myself for free. I'm sorry, my dog is going crazy in the background. So you could offer yourself for free at first, and once you've got that experience, then studios are much more likely to hire you. And then I think there's a lot of competition now. So Pilates is growing in the UK for sure. It was huge. Oh God. Hello Sandy, sorry everyone. So Pilates is really popular in Australia and America, and it is getting more popular in the UK, but it's still not quite as big as elsewhere. But there are a lot of instructors. There just aren't necessarily, in my experience, a lot of really good instructors. So there's a lot of competition, and you just have to get yourself out there and show studio owners that you are one of the good ones. Another way as well of setting yourself apart from all the others is to maybe come up with, like, how are you going to be different? So for us, I created a hybrid training class. So the model method was HIIT and Pilates, because I just felt there was a gap in the market, and that's kind of been really instrumental to our growth, because we do something different. Social media will really help. I think people like to see who is going to be teaching me, and what's their personality like, and what's their studio look like, or where they teach. So I think social media is really important, whether you like it or not. It will really help you show that you're different to other instructors, and just really making sure that you've done your workshops. You keep adding on, whether it's pre and postnatal, or Pilates for runners, like I said, or Pilates for people with injuries. There's even a Pilates course for that you can use on people who've had breast cancer, where there might be slight difficulties with scar tissue from surgeries. So just try and get yourself as big a client base as possible, or potential client base, and then go from there. So what else did I have on my list? Group versus one-to-one. So someone asked which I preferred, and if there's a difference from a training point of view. So you've got the options with Reformer of teaching group and one-to-one, and same with mat work. Most Reformer studios, they'll have around a maximum of 9 to 10 Reformers. So I've taught in some studios where there are 3, which is lovely. And you would think that with less Reformers it's easier, but actually, because there are only 3 clients in the class, it becomes closer to a one-to-one session where you really tailor it to the customer, and it can actually be more hard work because you're really having to think about their needs. Whereas in a group class where there's 9 or 10 clients, you can't tweak it that much. So you have your routine already planned, and unless someone turns up and says, I'm pregnant, you just teach what you had planned. So sometimes that can actually be easier. You just have the shame that you can't correct everybody in a 9 or 10 person Reformer class. There's just too many people in there. Mat classes, obviously, because there's no equipment, can get even bigger than that, and I think that's when you start to lose some of the focus of Pilates. So some of you may have been to gyms where there's 30, 40 of you in the class, and that is, you just can't, you just cannot correct people in those types of classes. So I started off preferring group classes. I really enjoyed the buzz. I like the fact that you're standing at the front and, you know, you can have a bit of atmosphere and it's noisy and people might ask questions. And I really, really liked teaching group, and I actually found initially one-to-ones I felt quite awkward because I was used to teaching group. All of a sudden there's silence and that person is just listening to every word that you say, and there's a lot more pressure on you. So I didn't like one-to-ones at first. I found them quite awkward. And then the more I practiced them, the more I actually really started to like them, and the fact that you could get to know the customer, and maybe I'm nosy, I don't know, but find out what did you do on the weekend, or, you know, how's everything going with your new house, and get to build a better bond with them. And when you have that bond, they're then more open to telling you about if they might have a pelvic floor issue, or if something's been hurting, or if they have new goals. So I started to really enjoy one-to-ones, and now, to be honest, I do miss group classes, but I think that one-to-ones are incredible because you can grow with the client, you can really get to know every single quirk of theirs, and it's a bit more challenging and it's a bit more motivating for you because you have to go away and think, I just can't work out why she can't activate her glutes, and you have to go back to your studies or ask, you know, we have a physio at the studio, ask them, you know, what can I do differently that you maybe wouldn't get that challenge in a group class because you just wouldn't know. So someone said, would you set a maximum on mat work classes? Oh, it's really tricky because I'm really torn. I know that we're an expensive studio, so our one-to-one sessions are expensive, and so that means that I want as many people to do Pilates as possible, but at that price I know not everyone can do it. So I like the fact that there are options of doing classes that are bigger and are just mat work that are then maybe slightly more affordable and more people can do Pilates. I do think that there should be a maximum. I do think 30 in a class is too much. So I once, when I moved out to Oxford, went to a mat class in a gym and there were about 30 people, and I just felt lost, and I felt like I know Pilates and I know my body and I'm not even sure I know what I'm supposed to be doing. So I think that was too many. I used to teach in a physio, at a physiotherapist's, a mat class, and there would be a maximum of 10, and I thought that was quite nice. So it needs to be a maximum that you feel that you can be in control of, and if someone in that class is injured, you feel confident that you will still be able to keep an eye on them. Do I keep a record of what I do with each individual client? Yes. So in our studio, every single client has their own folder, and in that folder we write down at the end of the session exactly what they did, mainly because we don't want to replicate every single session, but also in case a different instructor then teaches that client. So we write down what we've done, and then there's also underneath there's a notes section where you can tell the next instructor, I noticed today that her left glute is lazier than her right glute, and I think that it's coming from, you know, her tracking of her knee, and so can you please double check it? And then we can check it against each other, and maybe the other instructor comes in and says, oh no, I noticed actually it's because of her lumbar spine. And then we also leave a note for the next session. So if we think if we did see someone with a really lazy left glute and we know we're teaching them next, we'll leave a note to remind ourselves to either double check it or to do lots of glute work in the next session. So I think that's the lovely thing about doing one-to-ones, is if you leave 5 minutes at the end of each client, you can write extensive notes about that client, and then they're going to get more out of their sessions. Especially if you're seeing lots of clients, because you can't remember everything about everyone. We also keep notes on whether they're left or right-handed, because that's going to really affect lots of the exercises actually, and also if they're dominant on one side, any injuries, also preferences, if they really hate doing clams, and you can come up with another way of working the same muscle but in a different exercise, it's good to write that down as well. So I'm just looking to see if there are any other questions that I haven't answered. If there are any questions and you're listening right now that you want answering, let me know, because otherwise I'm probably going to wrap this up. Do I have any workshop recommendations? Again, a lot of them are through your training providers. And because I have to do a certain amount with STOT to keep my accreditation, I do a lot of them with them, so I'm quite biased. But all of them will do workshops, and we're thinking of holding our own workshops soon as well. So if that's something you'd be interested in, then let me know. And they would be not necessarily based on, like I said, Pilates with people who've had cancer, but more on like teaching skills and anatomy skills. So STOT do loads of them. I don't think that you don't have to have trained with STOT to do the workshops, because I took one of my instructors on one which was about the anatomy of the elbow and the knee, which is genuinely really fascinating. So yes, STOT do lots of them, and I would imagine the others do as well, but unfortunately I can't really comment on those ones. Perfect. Any last little bits? The other thing to mention, someone had talked about the cost of Pilates courses. So if you've ever done a PT qualification, you'll see that the difference in price between Pilates courses and PT courses is huge. So I think reformer courses tend to be around £2 or £3 grand, whereas you can do a PT qualification, I think, for under £1,000. And the reason being is it's just so much more in depth. Honestly, you learn so much more about anatomy, and then there's a lot more follow-up. So I did my PT qualification, and I don't think that I've ever really been in contact with them again since. Whereas with START, I have to do, I think, 3 or 4 workshops every year. And, then I've done new courses and new exams. So you get more for your money, basically. The difference between dynamic and classical Pilates, so like I said, classical is more about how Joseph Pilates would have taught it, whereas dynamic is where it's almost been slightly tweaked, and it's maybe different breath patterns, different speeds, or equipment added in that maybe Joseph wouldn't have used. So it really depends on what you personally enjoy more. I am more dynamic. It doesn't mean I don't like the classical, but STOT, I find, we're quite they teach some of the classical repertoire, but they're a bit more open-minded about using props and tweaking things depending on the body you have in front of you. So that's why I quite like them. Who did I qualify for PT with? So I think that they've changed their name. I think they used to be called Fitness Industry Education, and it's really difficult. I'm torn with PT qualifications. I think if you're only going to do a PT qualification and you don't have any other qualifications in fitness, you want to make sure that you have one where it's almost entirely face-to-face. So you're in the gym or you're in the classroom, and you have a lot of one-to-one time with your instructors. Whereas and I don't know if I'm completely speaking out of turn here, if you've done Pilates qualifications, I felt like I didn't need to have the most intensive one, because a lot of the stuff you've already covered in your Pilates. So the anatomy, you actually do more anatomy in Pilates than you do in PT. So you come at the end of the day, whichever PT qualification you choose, you come out with the same qualification, you know the same exercises. So it really, the only thing I think that varies is how much time you spend in the classroom compared to how much online training you're doing, and the price, basically. So if you're doing a PT qualification after your Pilates, I would just do the one that fits into your life best. And I think that's everything I have down on my list. I hope this has been helpful and I haven't just rambled on and on and on. For anyone who is thinking about doing Pilates and wants to practice more but doesn't live in London and wants to train with us, we do have an online plan where we could assign you videos that are Pilates based. So do feel free to check that out. That's on our website. You go to pilatespt.co.uk and then go to the Model Method online and you can read up more about that. We also have lots of posts on our Instagram. I presume most of you have found us from Instagram anyway, but I try and do lots of how not to do exercises, how to do them. If you're enjoying those, let me know. And if you have any other questions once we've logged off, feel free to send them through. There's also a blog post on the website about being a Pilates instructor. And I think that's everything. So thank you everyone so much for listening. Let me know if this has been helpful and I will do another one. If it was rubbish, also let me know. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your evening. Oh, will I be doing another Q&A soon? Well, if you liked it, then yes. And if there's a topic that you want me to discuss, so some of the topics that I would really like to discuss, if they're helpful, are things like anatomy, muscle imbalances, posture, some of the Pilates exercises, sort of body awareness, and also being comfortable in your own body, things like that. So let me know. Thanks, everyone. Bye.